For the last 3 years, between recording segments of the D6 generation, Russ, Craig, and Rafe have had various conversations that have spanned the interests of gamerdom worldwide. This is one of those conversations.
D6G, The Lost Chapters.
Welcome again, friends, to The Lost Chapter, number 7. This time, we're going to talk about books. That's right, reading.
Oh, yes.
For inspiration, enlightenment, and even fact-finding.
Right.
What books do we read?
Exactly.
Alrighty.
While sipping our Dunkin' Donuts coffee.
Exactly. Well,
That's right.
I'm having a Pepsi again.
What?
I'm having tea
Yeah.
from Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka.
Right. Okay. Well,
They serve that here?
Well, not
Wow.
really. That's weird.
It's weird.
Okay. So we get questions all the time. What are we reading? What do you recommend? What do you like for this? Oh, I want a steampunk book. Oh, I want a fleet book because of Babylon or because of Firestorm Armada or whatever.
Yep.
So what we've decided to do, and we each individually do this by emails all the time. I don't know about you guys, but I do this a couple times a week.
You are way better at it than me, and Russ is second best. But Craig, you would write each individual listener just pages and pages and pages of your stuff.
Well, when I take reading seriously. I love to read. It's one of my favorite, activities. And so when somebody else that loves to read kind of comes along, I really want to give them, the best kind of idea.
Me, on the other hand, I'm like, just look it up, dude. I don't know. Go to Amazon.
Exactly.
For me.
So what we have done is we've kind of talked Rafe into at least giving us some semblance of a list.
And no comics. No comics. That's another episode.
Okay.
Nice.
There you go. I agree.
Okay. No problem.
So, but you can tell that Russ was sort of in charge of the structure because it's more structured than it would be.
Yeah, there's lots of categories again.
Yes.
Exactly.
Categories are
These
important. Categories are important.
It's all about organization.
Right.
Okay.
About click
So
boxes.
we are going to try to give you the not a definitive list, but the core list of books that we would recommend by these categories that Russ has come up with. And I think most of the categories make a good deal of sense, especially for the books that are in them.
I'm sure
So, Russ,
yes.
is this, if you haven't read these, you're not a geek? Is this, you
no,
could
it's
still
not-
be a geek,
it's
but
not-
you should still read these? What's going on?
These are books. I think. Well, I'm kind of thinking. Well, okay. This is a good intro into the sci-fi section, right? So, as our song said last week, our last episode, there, that the second lug of the geek, or perhaps the first, is sci-fi right after fantasy, and sci-fi is right after. And I think the it's not so much that if you haven't read these, you aren't a geek, but these are books that if you have not read, in certain geek conversations, you may be confused by certain references because these are kind of the core staples that I think that you should read if you want to really kind of get a good understanding of where sci-fi has come from, I guess, sort of the core. I don't want it to make it like the school list or these are the definitive books, just so much.
Okay.
These are books you should definitely have in your repertoire. It's kind of like not ever having seen Star Wars from a movie point of view. It's kind of like you really should see that movie if you want to consider yourself a sci-fi fan. You know,
Right. Yeah. I'm not approaching the list as something you have to do or you need to do to be a geek. I'm approaching it as if you are listening to this because you like reading, A, you're probably listening to it so you can go, oh, yeah, I read that and I liked it. Or B, you're reading it going, I haven't, I only started reading it recently, or, I know I haven't read a lot. What would I like?
Yeah, and you could be a younger listener, too, and never been exposed to this stuff. Like for example, Dune. Our generation sort of takes for granted that most people have read Dune by Frank Herbert, but a lot of younger listeners probably have never read Dune.
I've only read the first book. Is that a trilogy?
Well,
way more than
it kind of goes on forever. And it's been extended by his heirs to go on even farther. But
in fact, I would argue that many of the books we're going to talk about in this episode go on longer than they probably should have.
Yes, yes. I would say though, if you should, it would be nice to read the first Dune. I think there's a lot of great references in there. You can get away with watching the TV series or the movie, but the book is better. And so
I think the first three are key.
Yes, I would agree. But even just the first one's a good read.
The first one is great, and it stands alone as a great book.
Right.
But if you enjoy it, then you need to know that you should probably know that Dune Messiah and Children of Dune is out there.
Yes.
I think in the opposite order.
Beyond,
who's the author again?
Frank Herbert.
Okay.
But once you get past the third one, I think it becomes questionable value.
Then you're only going to be reading it if you really, really like the first
You're
three.
a hardcore fan, right?
What's interesting to me about this segment, when it was first pitched to me, I was like, but we're just all going to have the same list. This is going to be boring. And lo and behold, we do not have the same list.
And now I've also read...
I would have been very surprised if we had the same.
Now, I have read or listened to the Butlerian Jihad, which is the reboot of... Not reboot, but it's his son? Or someone writing the rest, and that's not a bad series, but it's
wait. I've never heard of this writing. So, like, there's 12 books of Dune, and he wrote the 13th, or is this a reboot?
It's sort of it's in the same universe, but it's so ancillarily
hundreds of years earlier.
Yeah, and it's really, I mean, Arrakis is there, but it's none of the same stuff. So it's really sort of, it's only. It's good, but it's not really related to Dune. I mean, it is, but it isn't. I don't know.
It's about it includes stuff that gets referenced as ancient history in the other books.
So it's a fun read. I enjoyed it, but it's not like definitive sci-fi literature like Dune is. You know what I mean? So I think Dune is that. Anyway, so Dune. That's one of my. So Craig, what would you recommend next? Is this sort of the core sort of thing you should read? I think
I recommend to everyone Starship Troopers by Robert.
As do I.
Wow. I don't think I've ever read that.
I'm going to go back on what I just said. You have to read this book.
How do I get it? Isn't that the one that's out of print or something?
No, it's not out of print. It's everywhere.
Is this the one that talks about Space Marines and carapaces and stuff?
This is where the idea of Space Marines basically came from. Is the assumption.
Okay.
This is the first
where super power armored guys fighting alien bugs and.
Now, don't be confused by that movie. Okay,
don't.
There was that movie called Starship Troopers, and for its own, it was a fine little film. But
it's a fun film.
But the fact that they're all like Imperial Guard-looking people has nothing to do with what's actually in the book. You see, in the book, they're actually, honest to goodness, even more powerful actually than the 40K Space Marine because they have jump jets and they can drop nuclear weapons off their racks in the back, and they do all kinds of crazy things. So it's a really interesting book, and it is, I think, the first. Because where was it written, Craig? It was 19.
It was, I believe, it was written in the 40s or 50s.
So it's really,
that's what I thought.
So it's the first book to really present power armor in any way.
It was written before Vietnam, but it actually presupposed that a Vietnam War would occur.
No way.
It's fascinating to me because it comes from it's an awesome story, but it also comes from a very interesting political perspective.
Yeah.
That the men who made the movie were diametrically opposed to.
Right, exactly.
And so what you actually get in the movie is the exact opposite, basically, of what you would get out of the book because the guys in the movie disagreed with the book to the point where they wanted to mock it.
Right.
And what you actually get is the fact that most of Hollywood doesn't really understand political philosophy, and what happens is they actually prove who the jackbooted thugs really are.
Well,
moving on.
If you take the philosophy out of it, though, it's basically Space Marines versus bugs, right?
Okay.
Awesome.
But
That's what I'm saying. Without the philosophy, it's an awesome
what's
story.
funny about the philosophy, no matter which side of the fence you're on, is the book literally satires the kind of thing that's in the movie, and the movie satires the kind of thing in the book. So it's kind of funny to read both.
Yeah, it's very funny.
But anyway, so it's definitely a worthy read, and
it's fast. It's not big.
Nope.
And you can still get it. So even though it's in the 50s.
Oh yes, just like Tolkien, for example, you can still get too. In fact, you can still get War and Peace. When was that written, Craig? You can
still get the Odyssey. That was written over 2,000 years ago.
You can get the Bible, Rafe. I don't know if you knew this, but you can get the Bible, and that was written.
You can get pretty much anything from Shakespeare.
Well, I just remember, I think Juan talked about this in one of the game day trips, and I think that was Starship Troopers, but I thought for some reason it was out of print or something.
No, it is not out of print. A classic.
Absolute classic.
Now, another classic I would suggest that Craig may disagree with me on, but Stranger in a Strange Land.
I can't disagree with it because I've never read it.
It's an excellent book, also by Hedlund, and it is where Grok comes from. And it's funny because I mentioned Grok on the show, and I tease Rafe, but on the word of the day calendar, Nicole saved one for me because Grok was the word of the day calendar.
What's that mean again?
It means to fully understand or comprehend.
Ah, okay.
And in the book, Stranger in the Strange Land, he is a Martian coming to Earth, and the word he uses is Grok all the time. And because it's a literary classic, it sort of became a thing. But anyway, so Stranger in the Strange Land, another great book, totally different political slant, nothing like sort of the messages in Starship Troopers. Not as militaristic a book, but still a very good read. So another classic sci-fi I would recommend.
Yeah.
What about you, Craig? Get another one? The core one?
Yeah, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card.
Yes.
Oh yeah, what's that about?
That's a must read.
What do you mean our lists are going to be the same? How can our lists be the same if you've never even heard of any of these books?
No, I never even heard of it. Never read it or heard of it.
Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card is another classic.
Yes.
It is awesome to the point where it's as philosophical as Starship Troopers, but it leaves you to make your conclusions. It doesn't give you any conclusions.
Right.
But it's very much about very young people being trained as warriors, but in a very high-tech environment.
So
you guys read some pretty heavy crap, man.
Oh no, dude!
Ender's Game is actually written as a young adult novel.
Yeah, it's above. I'd say it's not. It's a little more sophisticated than Narnia, but it's a book you should read. I would think it should. Well, see, unfortunately, a lot of these books don't make reading lists for schools anymore. But what's great about Ender's Game is, and what's cool about the plot of the story, even if you don't look at it as some kind of educational piece, is that basically the premise is these kids are these really good kids are being taken for essentially virtual gaming, right? Yeah. But they're in suits and stuff, so it's physical movement and stuff. So it's kind of like Microsoft. Imagine using Microsoft Kinect to fight people and things. But then ends up there's real actual things happening, and he's in a real war, and it's kind of this really interesting thing. And then what happens? It's just a really interesting story. I don't want to spoil it too much for people who haven't read it, but
it's an awesome psychological portrait of this incredibly gifted young boy.
Right.
Dang, that sounds like I'd like it.
And what he goes through this training and what he has to do to overcome both his past and he's got a huge issue with his brother and his sister and what they're asking him to do about the future. It's just really stunning.
And the rest of the story, and what's good is there's a series of books all based on the Ender's Game series, and they're all equally, at least I've read the first three, I guess, but they're all, I guess, someone tell me that after the first three they get kind of weird.
Yes, they get weird.
But the first three are fantastic. Fantastic.
Orson Scott Card has a very strong religious background and a very strong religious point of view, and many of his books start out awesome, and then his religious point of view starts to inform the later books. He's kind of like, now that I've got you, let me talk to you about my religion. And it's not proselytizing at all. He's not, but it's just that point of view starts to become much more prevalent, and the books tend to become more philosophical and less action oriented.
Oh, okay.
So I would say that Ender's Game is another one of those series that sort of outlives it, at least for me. I mean, I know people who love it and read all of it, and it's weird because they're awesome, then they get weak, and then they kind of get awesome again when he gets into the Shadows segment, which actually looks at other characters from the first two books of Ender's Game and tells the story from their point of view.
Right.
Which is really cool.
And is Ender's Game the name of the trilogy or series, or is that the name of the first book?
First book.
Okay.
First book. But it's often called, people often say the Ender trilogy. Or
So that way if people are actually looking for it, I want to lead them in the right direction.
Yes.
Orson Scott Card, Ender's Game, you'll get everything you need.
Right. And all these books are also on Audible, by the way. Not to be super addy, I'm just saying.
Right.
Now,
no, I mean, it's funny you should say that because some of these outdated ones...
they're not outdated. They're classic literature.
They're
the ones that I haven't read, like Ender's Game, I'm like, oh, that might be a good Audible pick.
Yes. Yes, it would. It would be actually, all these would be great Audible picks.
Yeah.
And some of them are nice and long, like Dune, for example. Now, another one, Craig, have you read Ringworld by Larry Niven?
To be honest, that's the first one on your list that I tried and I didn't
like. It's definitely a little drier than most, but I like the engineering in it.
I can see where an engineer would really appreciate it more than...
Now, Ringworld, Halo, the video game, is based on the stuff in Ringworld. Rafe, have you read Ringworld?
Nope, but I remember you talking about it when Halo came out.
Yeah,
so I know a little bit about Ringworld.
I do like that book, but it's probably one of the drier books. I don't know if some of my Asimov stuff counts, but Ringworld's probably the driest book. But I like it as an engineer. So if you're into the kind of sort of techie stuff like the giant rings and the Dyson sphere kind of things, it's a good book for that.
Yeah.
What's this David Drake one here? Is that yours, Craig?
Hammers Slammers? Heck yeah.
Not me.
I don't think I've read that one. What's that one about?
Yeah. Hammers Slammers is awesome. Hammers Slammers is a whole series. Again, this is from the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
It's like a Goonies movie.
It's about a mercenary unit in a universe where armor is basically they're all hover tanks.
Ooh, cool.
And they use a plasma type weapon, and that's all the weapon that they use, and it's just the size of the weapon that results in, like, the tanks have a huge version and the Jeeps have a smaller version, and that you can use it for anti-air because it's just an awesome, the technology is very well described, and it's a very 100% hardcore military sci-fi.
Yeah,
it's all about these armored units that get hired all over the galaxy, and they go and they show up with their tanks, and they're basically the creme de la creme of mercenary units.
Oh, cool! That sounds good.
And there's a whole bunch of books, and they're coming from a hardened veteran's point of view of war.
Okay.
Now, I don't think we could leave core. We're almost done with our core set. I don't think we can leave, though, without talking about Isaac Asimov. Craig, have you read a lot of his stuff?
I have not. I
have.
It's not that I've tried and failed. It's that for some reason it's just been doomed to always, as it rises to the top of my queue, something else takes its place.
Now, what have you read, Rafe?
Yeah, I for some reason I'm blanking on the names, but I remember, not blanking, but even when I couldn't remember them when I think about Asimov, I must have read, I think, either 3-4 novels and maybe in the collection of short stories, so they're all jumbled together in my head. What I remember distinctly, though, is the ones detailing the rules of robotics.
iRobot, yep.
Is that but it was different than iRobot.
Well, there's a bunch of short stories. But
those rules are throughout his books.
Yeah, but he sort of sets it up and then he goes through. But I think
it's iRobot and a collection of short stories dealing with robots.
I believe iRobot is a short story.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, or a novella at most.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's seminal because, it's so funny. Like people in robotics, or when I was listening to, you listen to other things in science, I don't know, is he a scientist? They almost talk as if the books in Isaac Asimov's stories is true science. Is that because he's a scientist?
No, it's because a lot of science is informed by science fiction, believe it or not. And I think a lot of these books are like that.
Believe it.
And I think his thinking of how robots should work was just it's very well thought out and very thoroughly thought out. And I think a lot of robotics has kind of looked at his sort of defining of how that would work. But what I wanted to recommend of his works actually is, because he's got a lot of these short stories and a lot of them take place sort of in the now or an Earth slightly modified. But the Foundation series is fantastic, and it's really the first set of books I read that was like about just giant spacefaring races and that kind of thing.
Okay.
So I highly recommend that one if you really want to read a meatier book of his, because a lot of his other stuff, as you said, is shorter and more like, sort of like little mental puzzles, whereas Foundation is sort of a bigger sweeping saga. So I think you should definitely get some of his stuff under your belt just to see what it's like, even if it's just a short story, though.
So if they want to read the short stories one, is it called like Isaac Asimov, a collection of short stories?
Yeah,
I can't remember.
Search for his stuff. He's got.
But there's so much. Like, how do they read the seminal one?
Just look for an anthology.
Yeah,
with like iRobot in it.
Yeah, there's all kinds of. Yeah, just go to Barnes & Noble, Ask, or just go through. On Audible, just look for his name. They're all there. They've got everything.
Okay.
So that's the oldies but goodies, if you will, really mostly.
Right. And I'm sure we've missed some, but that's.
Oh yeah, there's tons.
And of course, there's all
the be all end all, right?
And other books other books that we'll talk about, you'll argue should be in the classics, and so
yes.
Remember, this is more of a recommended reading list rather than a definitive. Yeah. This is our list, and this is how it should be the one true way.
And I'm thinking also for our younger listeners, if your teacher's like forcing you to read one of these books, don't panic because they're actually fun to read. At least for me, they were.
Exactly. I don't know. As an English teacher, I don't know. There's nothing on that list that I.
Yeah, they're not going to be forcing.
I used to force my students to read Starship Troopers, but then they just managed to keep adding actual crap books to my reading list. So eventually, I lost the ability.
Yeah, that's too bad.
Hey, for younger students, Craig, would they allow, like when I was a kid back in the day, and I said I don't want to read Johnny Tremaine because I read that 8 years ago. And can I read Huck Finn or Isaac Asimov?
No.
That sucks.
No. Yep. Yes. Teachers are getting less and less ability to kind of make their own decisions, and more everything is kind of cookie cutter.
That's too bad.
Balls.
It is. Okay, moving on.
Moving on. So how about some more recent sci-fi, like series that the authors might still be alive or something?
Well, we've talked ad nauseum about Honor Harrington.
Yes, we have.
We love it. Now, the
Fantastic.
thing is, remember that not everybody loves it. And in fact, Ross Watson will tell you that Honor Harrington is too perfect. And so that does bother some people because she really is good at everything she ever tries to do.
Yeah, that's okay, though.
No,
Yeah,
I'm
it
okay.
doesn't bother me.
But if the idea of a superhero
Yes.
character bothers you, then that's not the way to go. In fact, if a superhero character bothers you, then look up Lois McMaster Bujold's Miles Vorkosigan series, the one I'm reading now, where the main character is basically a deformed dwarf that has to fight for every ounce of respect other people give him. And there you go. That's kind of like the opposite version of that.
Yeah.
He's the antithesis.
Exactly. There you go.
He's the anti-hero.
There you go.
I agree.
And then, of course, we've talked a lot about Armor recently.
Yes, we have.
Awesome story. Another Power Armor story. We've mentioned Live Free or Die by John Ringo. John Ringo,
Fantastic.
I would argue, has a whole... Yeah, I would argue he's got a whole bunch of really cool books someone else talk because I've just lost the ability.
Ringo does. He bounces around all kinds of genres. He does a lot of sci-fi, but he also does sort of alternate history or just modern works too. And I think he's got a lot of interesting reads. I really enjoyed Live Free or Die. It was a really interesting take on sci-fi. It does remind me of classic sci-fi in a way because it's got a lot of good sci-fi. Makes you think about problems that are in the world today and presents them in a way that sort of presents ideas to you that you can't really see because you're so close to them in today's world. But if you twist them and put them in another more extreme condition, it sort of makes sense.
That's interesting.
If you look at the classics, like some of the ones we talked about up there, that happens with. Ender's Game is a great example of that. Star Trek did a lot of that stuff, with the people that were black and white, literally color black and white, not getting along. I think you see, like, Live Free or Die does a lot of that as well. And I think
Live Free or Die, by the way, is the motto of the state of New Hampshire.
Yes, it is.
Does it take place in New Hampshire?
It takes place in the solar system, but it all ends up being around New Hampshire and maple syrup. Actually,
Yeah.
You understand? So it's pretty good.
Which is interesting considering how tiny New Hampshire is,
Right.
and that another book series later on down this list will actually have New Hampshire being the capital of the world.
Right. So, it's an important state. I'm not going to lie.
It is. It totally is. In sci-fi, New Hampshire cannot be underestimated.
So I'm not familiar with, Craig, is this you? Saga of Seven Sons?
Yes. Kevin J. Anderson's Saga of Seven Sons is a great read if you're looking for something sweeping, but at the same time sort of not really campy would be a bad term, but it's borderline. It's not really hard science fiction. Basically, there's aliens, but they also sort of they coincide with elements, and there are fireballs, but they're intelligent fireballs, and there's these gas giant creatures, and mute
cool.
button, and so there's all these different things. It's a really
hit
cool
your mute button, Craig.
sweeping. No, I'm going to hit your mute button. A big sweeping story that's really cool. I read it as it was coming out, which is a neat thing. But it's got lots of space battles and things like that.
That's always good.
But again, it's kind of it's sort of weird and almost fantasy-esque in a way. It's not dark or gothic, but it reminds me of the 40K universe in that it's a very unique take on the sci-fi situation.
Nice.
Then you've got David Brin, who has an awesome series.
This is fantastic. I'd forgotten about these. I love this series of books.
This is an awesome series.
The Uplift Wars are awesome.
It's called the Uplift Wars.
Yeah.
The whole concept is that basically the theory is that most alien races, there's a whole bunch of alien races, and the theory that all of them go on is that you can't get into space without help.
Right.
And so what you want to do is you want to find races that are almost ready to go into space and then help them, uplift them, if you will. And what you do, then you incur a debt with them where they owe you.
They become like your indentured servants, right?
Exactly. And so it's a race to find these other races.
Now, wasn't the big deal was that the humans got in without being uplifted?
Exactly. So not only that, but they started uplifting other races.
Right. We uplifted dolphins. It was cool because there's a scene, the very first book, I think, they have a giant spaceship, and large chunks of it, or all of it, are filled with water, right? And the dolphins swim around. So it's kind of cool. Like, it's really...
Are these dolphins like intelligent sentient
Oh, yeah, they've been
beings?
uplifted. So they've been, I think, because didn't the humans actually uplift the dolphins and give them better intelligence through genetics? Like, isn't that part of the deal?
I think was like a big problem for all the alien races, because you're not supposed to do that.
Right, so we uplifted dolphins and monkeys and a bunch of other, large brain, even dogs, I think, right? So then we get the spaceships designed around dolphins. It's really interesting. It's a really cool series.
It's really cool.
Yeah, really cool.
Never heard of it.
Very different.
I've talked a lot about David Drake's Crisis of Empire, in that it's David Drake and somebody else in the first three. It's a different author for each of the first three books. It's awesome. And then he gives it to Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough, which should cost him at least a couple years in purgatory, because she totally blows the whole thing and it sucks. But the first three books of Crisis of Empire are awesome. That's another huge, sweeping saga about a huge interstellar empire that's collapsing, and it's from three different points of view. There's a military guy, and there's a business guy, and there's a diplomatic guy. So each book is from a different point of view, which is just
And
absolutely
this is still
awesome.
sci-fi?
This is totally sci-fi. Yeah. As a one-off book, C.S. Friedman's In Conquest Born is another really cool book. It's about, there's these two empires and they hate each other, but this man and a woman from each of the empires kind of meet up, and they have a really interesting relationship that spans over the course of their life as they meet at all these different battles and things like that. So that's cool. It's a one-off. Now, the one where I was saying where New Hampshire is the capital of the world is by Julian May, and it's called the Galactic Milieu series.
Yeah.
It's huge. There's many, 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 many books, and it spans hundreds of years. But it starts with an awesome book. It's actually first four books. The first book is called The Many-Colored Land, and it's actually more like fantasy than sci-fi, because it's in the near future. It's 100 years or so in the future, and they've figured out time travel, but it's so specific that the only place on the globe you can do it is this little valley in France.
Oh.
And the only time you can travel to is so far back in time that there's no sign of anybody having ever been there. It's like right during the dinosaur period.
Huh.
And so a bunch of people are like, wow, they bill it like, are you sick of the world? You're sick of the galaxy? Are you bored? You're ready to kill yourself? Why don't you go through the time travel device?
Time and stand in the valley.
Go back in time and try to recreate your, And so it's like this company is running it like a resort, but there's no coming back. So
wow.
it's almost like a role-playing thing. You specialize, like, I'm going to learn brewing and basket weaving. And so they teach you all the stuff you need, and you can buy these upgrade packages of all this information, of all this, like, either information or equipment, and everything is designed to dissolve after a year.
Oh, I see.
So they're like, you're not going to be able to, there's not going to be any stuff, there's not going to be any synthetics that are going to, so these guys are traveling through, and lo and behold, they travel through, and the Earth is already inhabited by these two different alien races.
Right.
Which is awesome. And so all the humans are being subjugated by these alien races, and the alien races actually coincide with human concepts of the fairy world. So you've got you're like, oh my God, that's an elf, that's a troll, and it's kind of like this is where all of these ideas in the human subconscious showed up, and they're actually these aliens, and the humans have to fight them off. And
now, Russ, have you read this one too?
No, I'm not familiar with this one. That sounds kind of interesting, though. I'll check that one out.
And then the rest of the books are actually how aliens first came to Earth, and they actually came to Mount Washington first, and that's why New Hampshire is the capital. And Concord, the capital of New Hampshire, is actually the capital of the world, and it's all underneath Concord is like all these huge sci-fi offices and everything.
Oh, that's
and
funny.
So Concord itself is untouched. It looks exactly like it looks today, which is cool.
That's funny.
So that's really cool. If you like Imperial Guard or you like foot sloggers, Jerry Purnell's Falkenberg's Legion, which is another series about mercenaries, is awesome. It's all about this one group of mercenaries, and they kind of get stranded on this planet, and they have to fight their way through this planet, and the technology is awesome, and they've got all these different kinds of guns and different kinds of weapons. It's very character-based. Absolutely love it. I've lent it to several of my military veteran friends, and they all love it. If you're looking for fleet inspiration, Jack Campbell's The Lost Fleet series. We talked about this a while ago.
Oh, yeah, right.
Great stories. The political context. He focuses more on wars that aren't just and we shouldn't fight, which is fine. But that's not really why I go to sci-fi. To those aren't the questions that are there unjust wars. There absolutely are unjust wars. Are they bad? Yes, they're absolutely bad. But that's kind of I take that as a given, and then I don't really go there.
Well, that's kind of cliche, right? It's cliche.
Exactly. It's very cliche. So to respond to that, you've got R.M. Melick's Tour of the Merrimack books, which I talked about a lot about a year ago when I was discovering them, which are awesome because you have the Roman Empire resurrected as this giant interstellar power.
That's cool.
So that's really cool. I highly, highly, highly recommend those. And then I've got two more. Very briefly, I just talked about already the Michael Stackpole BattleTech books. I highly recommend them. There's intrigue. There's battles.
Well, that was a little fast. What's that called? In case people want to do this one.
Michael Stackpole's BattleTech novels.
So Michael Stackpole is the author.
Michael Stackpole is the author.
Right.
Okay.
There are scores of BattleTech.
Yeah, they're
novels.
hit or miss. Some of them aren't so good.
Yes, they're very hit or miss.
Oh, I see.
Except that Michael Stackpole was the author who was given the task of writing the actual story arc of the Inner Sphere that the whole game is based in.
Yeah, these are good.
When you go to the bookstore and you see the gajillions BattleTech, focus on the Michael Stackpole ones, is what you're saying.
Michael Stackpole's books are the ones that actually tell the story of the Inner Sphere.
I concur. I concur with that recommendation.
Great books. The intrigue is awesome. The character development is awesome. It's really, really good books. He kind of falls down a little bit in describing BattleTech battles because there's only so many ways that armor can slough off like rain.
Right.
And then to me, this one is like a gem that almost no one knows about, but I could be wrong. It's a series called the Sten Series. And Alan Cole and Chris Bunch are the authors. And basically the concept is there's this guy who's been basically created to be this assassin for this eternal emperor. Sound familiar? Except that the eternal emperor actually walks amongst us, and he's a normal kind of guy, apparently. And this guy, Sten, is like his go-to assassin.
Ooh.
But slowly and he has a different adventure. He has a Scottish friend and a couple other characters that are regulars throughout the book. And every book is a little adventure that's standalone, but over the course of the books, he starts to discover things about the Emperor and about the Empire, and it slowly comes to a head in the last two books where he has to make some seriously difficult decisions about. Basically, the Emperor becomes sort of like a father figure to him, and he has to make some really tough decisions. Loved the books. They're down in the pub. I read them once every couple years. I go back to them. I really enjoy them.
I'll have to check those out. Try that one.
Yeah. So that's pretty much most of the A-list sci-fi, more modern sci-fi books that I have in the pub. There are others, but
Rafe, do we miss any? Do we miss any sci-fi for you?
Well, I'm wondering, do you think the Black Library Gaunt's Ghosts? Are we talking about sci-fi there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I
totally are.
Yeah, definitely. You could talk about that. So they're my of the Black Library sci-fi side of things, which is 40K, really, right?
Right.
I would agree with you. I think Gaunt's Ghost is a great set of reads, and of course, very inspirational for guard players.
Absolutely fantastic. I mean,
just be aware that Dan Abnett has no problem killing major characters.
Right.
That's like George R.R. Martin.
Yeah, I don't care about that.
That's to me what makes is part of a great series.
Nobody's
to me. And so they're written by Dan Abnett. I think they all are. I think they're up to 7 or 8 books, perhaps by now. The first, they're known as the Gaunt's Ghosts book. But I'm not sure if the whole series is called that. But the very first one is Gaunt's Ghosts. Would you say that they could be read by people that don't know 40K? Because I think they could.
Oh yeah,
100%.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but I know Dan Abnett's a bestseller, Times bestselling author, and I'm not sure if it's for the Gaunt Ghost ones, but if Gaunt's Ghost is not on the Times bestsellers, they should be. I mean, I think they're that good.
Talking to Nick and Vincent over the weekend, their numbers indicate that about 40% of the Black Library readers don't even know 40K is a game.
Right.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, no,
They really have they either don't play it or they don't have they have no interest in it. But the universe is so compelling that they're fans of the universe through the books.
Yeah, in fact, you see Black Library novels now on the front of Barnes & Noble with the new release sections. Like, it's not even hiding in the back. It's right there.
And if for people that don't know 40K like a second language like we do, the book is basically run by Commissar General Ibram Gaunt, and it's about his travels of how he got educated at some points and how he leads the Tanith First and Only.
Right. And I think this is my favorite series of Black Library stories, even more than Horus Heresy and the other ones, just because I really like. First of all, I like Imperial Guard. So if you're an Imperial Guard player, this is a must-read set of books. But I also just like the stories. I think it's just a really compelling, great set of stories in an area of the 40K universe that, unless you know the Gaunt's Ghost stories, it's really kind of a neat perspective to see how the life from the Guardsman kind of thing.
Yeah, he's got it all.
Yeah.
You get introduced to all sorts of different aspects of the 40K universe too.
Right.
They're on Death Worlds, they're on Hive Worlds. It's a really cool way to learn about the 40K universe.
Yeah, I think, in fact, I would recommend this if you have not read any 40K books or don't even know what the 40K universe is at all. I think Gaunt's Ghost is a great place to start.
Yes. And maybe now that we're thinking about it, I think the second best, which is also Dan Abnett, would be the Eisenhorn trilogy.
Yeah.
Which again, I don't know if you could...
To me, they're a little more specialized because they're much more intrigue and espionage.
Yes.
So if you want more action and battle scenes, then that's not. I love them, but they're not really. They're not gonna. They're not gonna sate your thirst if you're looking for big sweeping battle scenes like you get out of Gaunt's Ghosts.
Right.
Yeah. Good one, Rafe. Any other sci-fi before we move on to some other sections here before we run out of time? And they kick us out of dunks? Well, so I really wanted to get sci-fi in, but I figure we have time. What do you think? We have time to talk about a little bit of some of the fun books, like humor books, maybe?
Yeah. Why don't we do that?
Sure. Okay.
So I think I do like to read books, obviously for fun too. And one of the books, probably the funniest series of books I've ever read, and I think most geeks have probably read them. In fact, they're quoted all the time. Is of course Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And the entire series they're on it. Now, I assume all of us have read them?
I have read them. I can't remember them worth a dang, but I've read them.
I think pretty much. I mean, Craig, would you recommend them, or do you?
I absolutely would.
Yeah, I think they're fantastic. I think now he's got a couple different. Douglas Adams has also several other series. Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency is another one, as well as some other books. But I think Hitchhiker's Guide really. Which is a funny story how that was written, because it actually came from a radio series, which then became a TV series, and then finally got codified into a book. But they are fantastic, extremely funny.
Don't judge them by any of the movies.
Yeah. Oh, God, no. The movies are god-awful. But the books themselves are fantastic, and I think it is definitely English humor. So if you don't like English humor, if you don't like Monty Python, that kind of thing, you might not enjoy it so much. But I think if you do like that at all, you will absolutely love these books. They're fantastic.
Yep. And so
isn't that where So Long and Thanks for All the Fish comes from?
That's the fourth book, yes, in the trilogy.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
But
which tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah, the most famous quote, of course, is "Don't panic," which comes from the books, and the fact that every traveler needs a towel. Pretty much is all you need to know.
And the answer to life, the universe, and everything is 42.
Yes, 42 also comes from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as well.
Okay.
And that the Earth was built by mice. That's another. But anyway, very, very good stuff, so definitely check that out. Now, another favorite of, I think, both Craig and mine, right, Craig, is who?
I would say, Douglas Adams is where to go if you're looking for fun, funny sci-fi.
Yep.
If you're looking for fun, funny, touching fantasy, there's no better place to go than Terry Pratchett.
I would agree wholeheartedly.
And
I've been wanting to read Terry Pratchett, but I haven't yet.
Specifically the Discworld, but anything he writes is gold.
Yes.
He's got a few other interesting. He's the one who wrote. He had. There's two concepts in his shorter novels that before he started doing the Discworld series that have always stuck with me. One was the concept that I can't even remember the name of the book, but worlds are created by this company, like a construction job, and they actually layer in all of the fossils to confuse the religious people that grow up on the planet.
That's hilarious.
And there's this one guy who hates his job, so he'll do things like put a wristwatch on a dinosaur's wrist.
Nice.
Just so it confuses people. And the other one is the concept. It's an alternate universe. It's an alternate Earth where the Vikings came to America before the other Europeans, so 1,000 years before,
Right.
and they met the Native Americans, and instead of fighting, they joined them and became a massive force. And so as Christopher Columbus is sailing towards the New World, he sees steam on the horizon. And they're like, what's that? And all of a sudden, a giant armada of armored warships comes barreling over the horizon.
Nice.
Crewed by Vikings and Indians, Native Americans. It was awesome. That's a page and a half of the whole book. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It's just a cool image that I've had in my head ever since then.
So where do you start there? Because I think I remember trying to look back in the day, and there were so many, I forgot where to start.
Yeah. Terry Pratchett, where does that start? Does it start The Light Fantastic, I think
I
is
think
the
that's
very
correct.
first
Yeah, I
book.
believe so.
Okay, is that part of the disc world that you were just talking
Yes.
about?
Yeah. All you have to do, really look. I would recommend you go online because you're going to want to read the books in order. Some of them. The key is he jumps around characters. Different characters are like you've got 3 or 4 books in a row will be about one set of characters, and then a whole new set of characters will be dealt with. So you've got a bunch of different storylines, a bunch of different places on the Discworld are dealt with. But the key is, the thing that ties them all together is that the characters are amazing. The humor, they're the only books that I laugh out loud when I'm reading.
Yeah.
Or when I'm listening. The latest one that came out, I listened to it. And just the concept of that book is Urukai, right? They're artificially created life forms that are meant only for war. What happens
Aren't
if
those orcs in Lord of the Rings?
They're the more powerful type of orc, right? They've been artificially created as an engine of war. And what would happen if one of them was raised outside of that environment and not told what he was for?
Right.
So he's like a servant, and he doesn't know. He's like, I have these visions of like death and destruction, and I don't know why. And it's awesome because it's like a nurture. Terry Pratchett is much deeper than you would possibly imagine, and every one of his books is looking at very wildly different philosophies or concepts of the self. It's so touching. I'll admit it. I've cried on more than one occasion reading a Terry Pratchett novel. They engage you on that deep emotional level while at the same time you're laughing out loud. They are
good.
If you put a gun to my head, I would probably have to say that Terry Pratchett's books the Discworld books are my favorite books of all time.
Wow.
Really?
Wow.
I didn't know that.
That's high praise. They are very good.
They really, really give me that over the course of the series. I mean, I can't think of other books where I've laughed out loud and I've really been moved to tears by either and it's not what you do to the characters. I hate when authors do that.
Yeah.
It's actually what the characters are doing, what they're experiencing.
Right.
It's just, I can't speak highly enough about Terry Pratchett and his books.
Yeah, they are good. And you're right. There's what's great about them is,
read them too, Russ.
I have, and what's nice about them is they do have a lot of that silly humor in them. But then you're right. They also bring it home with some very touching and deeper stories than you'd expect. You know,
Exactly.
And that's what makes it fun.
and they are very, very silly. I mean,
right? No, they're very silly.
It's a planet on the back of 4 elephants on the back of a giant turtle.
Right,
So,
literally, not some superstition.
Literally.
No, it is. It is. So it is very silly, but then it's also it's just really well done.
It's very touching.
Yeah. So that Terry.
Well, now I don't know
definitely-
what to pick for Audible. Dang it!
See, that's it's just a rich choice.
Yeah. And
Yep.
now branching off that very quickly is Dan Abnett's new book Triumph,
Is that
which is good.
Is that humor?
It is actually.
Oh, wow.
It reminds me very much of it. It's a darker Terry Pratchett without quite as much heart.
Oh, okay.
It's darker, more action oriented, but the characters are more kind of like, oh, they're funny and they run around and they do stuff.
Yeah.
So, but the sense of humor that it brings to the book is very similar to me.
Nice. Now, one set of books that this is kind of a guilty pleasure, really. Have you read any Robert Asprin Myth Adventures? I love them. They're not nearly as deep as Pratchett. There's not really any kind of hidden message. They're just stupid funny.
They're full of puns, really.
Right. They're just total puns.
I'm not a fan of Robert Asprin.
Oh, I love these books. I don't know why.
He's the Thieves World guy, right?
Also,
yes. This is Myth Adventures, but you're right. Yes, these were also. But Myth Adventures
Thieves'
really
World
funny.
isn't nearly as funny.
No, it's not.
Or is it
intended
supposed to be?
No, right. These are really, really funny. I got into them because I saw the original Phil Fogel graphic novels, right? And Phil Fogel used to do animations for Dragon Magazine, or just art for Dragon Magazine, and he did. And his covers attracted me to Myth Adventures, but they only did a couple of short graphic novels. And when I got the real books, I was just amazed at, again, how funny and yet compelling the stories were. Again, they're not as deep as Pratchett, but they're just really, really fun. So if you're looking for a fun fantasy, very fantasy sort of like typical,
very silly but fun, like you said,
they're a very good read, and they'll make you smile for sure. So I think you can't go wrong with any of those authors if you're looking for something a little lighter and not so deep as some of the early sci-fi we were mentioning earlier in the show.
Right.
So I don't know. What do you think? They're getting ready to kick us out of here pretty soon.
Yeah. We're going to have to do fantasy and, and horror another time.
Well, if you guys like this, let us know, and maybe we'll do another one in the not-too-distant future and cover the fantasy side.
Yeah, most of my picks were in the fantasy side.
Right. Well, now you have to go listen to some sci-fi, Grafe. Get all up to speed, man.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think I'm going to start with the Terry Pratchett, but is he fantasy, Greg?
Yeah, sure.
Terry Pratchett is 100% fantasy.
Yeah.
Oh, so we kind of blended the line there a little bit.
Well, it's definitely not serious fantasy.
Well, it's humor, though.
Right.
Okay. Well, I didn't want to get all excited about sci-fi and then go, what the?
No, that's a good point. Right. We should at least differentiate for the listeners that Terry Pratchett is fantasy.
Yeah, of the ones we mentioned, I don't know about so
what's the top pick?
Well,
for me, so I've only read Asimov. That's it.
Oh wow. Well,
and skip Starship Troopers.
You got some work to do.
Yeah, I can't. I'm not.
I'm thinking
maybe
Ender's Game.
I was going to say Ender's Game.
I'm thinking Ender's Game.
Yes, Ender's Game would be the way to go.
And I've read Honor Harrington too. So I'm thinking Ender's
Game. Go there.
I would say that's the first must-read of this.
And you've already read Douglas Adams, right? So you're okay there. Yeah, you're okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. Well, thanks for listening, folks, and get out there and do some reading.
There we go. See ya.
Thanks for purchasing a D6G Lost Chapter. Supporting the show helps it grow.
Doodle-doo, doodle-doo-doo-doo, doodle-doo-doo, doodle-doo-doo-doo-doo, bum diddle-doo-doo, bum 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 diddle-doo-doo-doo, ba-da-lum bum diddle-doo-doo, ba-da-lum bum diddle-doo-doo-doo-doo, diddle-doo, diddle-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, diddle-doo.
Right.
Riding for Venus.
I like the last part.